Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 156th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panelists will each choose a topic that they would like to share with the other panelists. God only knows how that's going to work out. Our panel beginning on my left is Ron Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Tom Finley, co-founder of the Great Lakes Resource Center. And on his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Ron, I've shared a list of possible topics today, but you're certainly free to bring up your own.
You know, all this turmoil going on now, we Democrats have to remember something. There's still support out there for this man at the top. I have a conservative cousin out in the West, and recently there was a Fox newscaster who had been critical of Mr. Trump, and he stepped down from his position. And she commented on Facebook, "Best news I've heard today." So it's out there. But I want to talk about impeachment. And one of the comments you made is there a style or substance going on here? And I started out of this thing thinking, this is a bad idea to bring this up. It's an election year. We have other things we need to think about. But I'm changing my mind a little bit, and I think that there's enough substance here that I want to see the investigation go through. Whether or not we get to trial, I want to see the investigation come through.
What do you think the substance is?
I think the substance is, well, the recent things about the business of bringing foreign powers into, that's I think is the smoking gun at this point.
Bring foreign powers
into helping with his political campaign. That was he asking Ukraine, and on TV asking Russia to investigate Biden and his son Hunter Biden. Maybe just the tip of this iceberg. I don't know. I'm not an attorney here. I don't know what's. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I don't know what's involved here particularly. But I want to see some. I want to see some work on this. I think for me, it's been very difficult for me not to engage in ad hominem attacks on President Trump. For those of you who don't know Latin, meaning attack the man for his personality rather than what he does. On the other hand, his personality somewhat influences what he does. He's impulsive. He's very smart, I think. You know, here we got all this furor about an impending impeachment process, and he generates a conflict in Turkey and Syria. Look at all the attention that gets. Takes some of the heat away. And he's done this, I think, from time after time in his thing. So I don't underestimate the man. I don't, and I'm thinking of the performance he gave when with that meeting with the Finland president, when he just completely lost it. Now, I've seen his program, his Apprentice. I don't think he's that good an actor.
I never saw it.
Well, he's pretty wooden. But, so I think he's smart. I think he's smart. He's clever. He knows how to protect himself by diverting attention away from other things. But I think there's probably, from what I can read for everybody, including Mr. George Will the other day, who said no Republican should vote for this man again. And he gave a number of reasons. George is my favorite.
I know,
you know,
of course he is.
But his column today, he attacks Beto O'Rourke and Elizabeth Warren and a number of other liberal policies for trying to step a little bit firmly upon the Constitution. And he's right. He's right. He's absolutely right in many cases. I don't always agree with him, but
so your bottom line is that it's a matter of substance and not
I think
style.
There's substance there, and I want to see it brought out.
But they've been talking about impeaching him before he ever took office.
Yeah, because I think that's ad hominem. I think that look what this guy is. You know, I mean, he has the greatest brain in the world with his 7th grade vocabulary. So, you know, what are we going to do?
Tom, what are your thoughts? Do you have a topic you'd like to attack?
Focused on the impeachment thing because it seems to be such a almost crisis issue with the country. It's diverting energies, thoughts, and attention to something that probably isn't a priority, but it's become a priority because of all the resources it's chewing up.
Yeah, certainly my initial objection to the thing.
Yeah, it is. And then the other part of the impeachment is, however reform begins to creep into our system, if you will, anything that will begin to redefine, no, I don't want to be redefined, but to emphasize the definition of the Constitution and the responsibilities of the parties will be a good move. And I mentioned earlier before we began, when Watergate occurred, the Republican Party stepped forward and did what they were supposed to do as a party. We don't have that right now. It's not happening. It's a lot of cover your backsides behavior as individuals, and then leadership, struggle for power being a real obvious point among various politicians. So that's an illness, and I think forcing or bringing about an impeachment process will begin to clarify. It'll be painful, but necessary. As far as the president is concerned, I voted for the man. I would not vote for him again because the personal characteristics he's exhibited to me are not presidential. I don't want him representing the country.
You don't even know who he's going to run against, but you're going to vote for them.
No, I don't know.
You don't know if you'll vote.
I'll vote or write in. I'll vote, because no vote is not an option as far as I'm concerned. But no, I don't think he's presidential. He's not what we need running our country. So that's the reason I'm talking about it. It's a personal basis, not political.
Excuse me. Do you think that? I'm sorry. Do you think that this impeachment movement that's been underway now since before the inauguration is setting the stage for the future? Is impeachment going to be on the table for every president from now on?
Well, it's always been on the table, but not to the degree now.
Pursued.
There's not an awareness, and if you look at a plus coming out of this in terms of what this kind of thing is doing, it is bringing an awareness of the various tools in our Constitution that should be applied. So it's not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned.
Patty, would you make a comment about the discussion we had right before the camera came on about the Republican Congress under John Boehner and what they did?
One of the big complaints about the impeachment that I've heard from the Republicans is that the Republicans do not have impeachment power or subpoena power, and that the individual committees are doing the subpoenas. Prior to Boehner being in Congress, that was not the case, but it was the Republican Congress under the direction of John Boehner that allowed for committees to have subpoena power within the impeachment process. So this is something that the Republicans are complaining about right now, but it's something that they actually put into place. Now that doesn't mean that they cannot complain about it. They may realize, oh, maybe we made a mistake here. You know, I always give someone the right to change their mind, but it's not a manipulation by the Democrats to try to, get the whole process in their place. This actually is, I actually want to talk about Syria as my topic, but just in response to what we've been saying about the impeachment, is that I think that the Republican slant has been on style, and the Democratic stance has been on substance as far as where they're coming from. The Republicans are putting this forth as an illegal, unconstitutional process because there are not witnesses, that they have all these subpoenas and all of these other things. And I think what people have to understand about the impeachment inquiry within Congress is this is not a trial that's going on right now. What this is akin to a prosecutor establishing a case. And when a prosecutor for any particular crime, they have a suspect or they have an idea that there might be a crime, they investigate. They investigate by interviewing witnesses in private. They don't do it publicly. It's not a public trial. And they do so to make sure with their witnesses that their stories match up. If it is in public, that's not going to be able to be done. From every attorney that I have heard speak, it's interesting. I wish I listened to Judge Napolitano on Fox News quite often, and he is not a liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but he said this is the way that you would run an inquiry. And I think that what the Democrats are doing right now is they are trying to see if there is a case. This case is different as well, because in the case of Watergate or in the case of Clinton, there were special prosecutors that actually did the investigations, whether it was Ken Starr or what was his name? I can't think of the guy in the Nixon and Watergate situation, but they had investigated. The crime came to them, or the supposed crime came to them. They investigated it, and then they wrapped it up in a nice bow and handed it off to the Congress for the impeachment hearing. Yeah. In this particular case, concerns about the Trump administration, in particular in this case with the influence upon elections, with the Ukraine issue and so forth, the concern was brought to the Department of Justice by the CIA and other credible sources. And William Barr said, there's nothing to see here, and did not even investigate that. So then it fell upon the Congress itself to go about the inquiry process themselves. Now, how this turns out, I don't know. I highly doubt that he will be convicted, if impeached, that he would be convicted by the Senate because of the basic makeup of the Senate right now. But as I've said before, we had discussed impeachment once before, I think we're to the point where enough is enough. And when we have a president that publicly goes before the country and says, I want you to, in China, I want you to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and so forth, because of all the crimes he's committed. We are encouraging foreign powers to become involved in our political process, and I've always thought that was dangerous, no matter which side that particular person is being. The concerns about Hunter Biden, I don't know. From everything I've found, Hunter Biden did nothing illegal. Nothing illegal. There is a question of the ethics. Well, there's questions of ethics and nepotism when you have Donald Trump appointing his son-in-law as the person to handle all of the affairs in the Mideast when he comes into office, or to place his own children. I don't see how that's any different. And Trump and I saw a quote by him in the past where he was saying how wonderful nepotism was, and he feels that it is important. And it was actually a question about The Apprentice, because one of the people that was on was being replaced with Ivanka. And said, how do you feel about, don't you think that smacks of nepotism when you replace the star of the show with your daughter? And he said, well, I believe in nepotism. It's really great, as long as it's not somebody else. So.
Well, that was a long discussion about Syria.
Well, yeah, now Syria.
Okay, now, go ahead.
But it was Patty, the point, and I look at it as analogous to a grand jury investigation. And any trial I've ever been involved in as a juror, they say, oh, just because this person's been indicted by the grand jury does not mean they're guilty. Yeah, yeah. But there is substance there that we can think that this should bring to a public trial. Before
we move on from this subject, there was one thing that I heard Judge Napolitano say, that under the current rules, you cannot ignore a subpoena. You can fight it, and you can not like it, but you can't put it in a drawer and walk away. You must respond to it.
Right, and our legal ways to respond to it, so that you do not have to actually go along with it, but you do have to respond to it. Yes.
Okay. How about Syria?
I have never thought of myself as a hawk in any way, stretch or form. Yeah. Maybe it was the age in which I was raised. I was
child of the 60s.
Child of the 60s, and I've said that before. It was, anti-Vietnam, all of that. But I look at the situation that's going on in Syria right now, and I have grave concerns about the foreign policy that is being espoused within this country. And it's not just Democrats that are concerned about this. Yesterday, the House of Representatives voted by a vote of 354 to 60 for a resolution rebuking Trump's decision to pull troops
The
out,
House, yeah.
out of Syria. He seems to be basing this upon his campaign promise to get out, bring our soldiers home. The problem with that, number one, is he has pulled soldiers out of Syria, leaving it open for the Kurds to be attacked by the Turks. But he has at the same time then placed 2,800 soldiers into Saudi Arabia and more soldiers into Iraq. So he's not bringing troops home. I am concerned when I hear a president state that the Kurds who fought with us in defeating ISIS, who lost thousands of lives defeating ISIS, are of no consequence to us. When we have a president who then states that actually the Kurds who helped us, who were our ally, are worse than ISIS. A president who states, knowing what happened on 9/11, that we don't have to worry about the resurgence of ISIS because they are 7,000 miles away. The situation is untenable. It is creating more of a refugee situation. We have Russia moving in to get a foothold within the Mideast, and Trump has stated that it's great if Russia comes in and helps out the situation. It's not our concern. I think as human beings and as citizens of this world, we have to be concerned about situations like this. To say that the Kurds, we helped them and we gave them a lot of money, but they didn't give us anything back. I am sending troops into Saudi Arabia and they're paying me. They're paying us to the point where it sounds, now this is me, but it sounds to me as if the American forces that we have are being auctioned off as mercenaries to the highest bidder. I know that sounds extreme, but when someone equates assistance to a country that is in need socially or whatever with how much money they can pay us, I have concerns.
You've made a comment too, John, on one of your handout here. What's the difference between what happened there and what we did in Vietnam? And one of the things that Trump seems to do is he seems to ignore all kinds of external advice from his security people or you know, all the agencies that are out there investigating the thing, and he just did this precipitously. In Vietnam, I think we probably had the consent of the military and Congress to get out of there. And certainly the will of the public to get out of Vietnam.
Certainly.
Yeah.
2 million people died as a result of it, and the communists took over South Vietnam.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, and we were, that was a very, very popular thing. That's one of the most popular things Nixon ever did.
Yeah.
Right.
How does that differ from abandoning the Kurds?
But the only difference, I think, is that it was taken under advisement.
I just want to put a bigger picture on this in terms of what's happening generally. And we've talked about corruption. It's one of the questions. And if you get corruption is associated with ethics and not the law of the land, but the ethical way to do things.
Okay.
What's ethical about abandoning the Kurds? There's nothing. It's a fact. It just runs the other way.
What about
it? Wasn't ethical in
the South
Vietnam either. But,
and it is, and it's the acceptance of corruption right now is okay, is the norm if we look at the way our government functions. Couple that with, let's remember too, we have a global economy. We've never had a global economy until this new era. So the involvement of governments in other people's governments is just a net result of that. Will happen. This is global. It's the politics influence economics and vice versa. So we got a whole tanglement of things going on we don't understand before and deal, and put that then with the president, who is not rational most of the time, my opinion, and you get these decisions made. Ethics
Speaking about
out the
having
window.
a global economy now, how do you feel about the tariffs that this country imposed on China, and then China imposed tariffs on us? Is this a proper way to handle trade negotiations?
Well, you get back to corruption and ethics again, don't you? Tariffs are a tax, and they're unpopular at the best, and so they have to be handled very carefully. Nothing has been, they're weapons.
Responses are, you do it to me and I'll do it to you.
Yeah, it's big, mine's bigger than yours, you know, it goes on and on.
To assume the trade war is
Nothing rational about it. It's a corrupt,
easy to handle.
it's a corrupt use of power.
In the case of the tariffs, it was the Chinese that put the tariffs on soybeans. Not only put tariffs on soybeans, but forbid farmers from buying, pig farmers from buying soybeans. They've recently backed off of that because the pig farmers were in dire straits. That's apparently pork is the meat staple.
Do you think the Chinese deal will come to fruition?
Pardon me?
Somebody told me that there's
Chinese deal will come to fruition or not.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You know, the deal they just struck.
Well, somebody told me just last night that there's an epidemic of disease among the pigs in China.
Yeah. That's right.
So
Shortage.
pork is
Big
going to
shortage.
get very expensive. So there's another example of how interrelated we are.
That's right. And so this new era, if you will, is stretching everything. But I don't know whether it encourages corruption or whether it just brings attention to how bad it is and what's going on.
When you think about, can you define corruption?
Lack of ethics.
Oh, that was quick.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a negative response, but in the use of ethics, corruption is minimized.
How would you define the moment that Barack Obama said to the president of Russia, "Tell Putin that I'll have more flexibility after the election"? What is that? Was that some kind of an ethical violation for him to make that kind of a promise?
What was it again, John?
He told the president.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, he was on camera, or the mic was open. He didn't know it, and he was talking to the president of the Soviet Union.
And I'm not sure what it was in reference to or what he was going to be more open about.
All he said was, though, after the election, I will have more flexibility, and you can tell the premier, or whatever Putin's title is.
And again, I don't know what he was referring to. I think it smacks of ethics, violation as far as
The fact is,
that
it was
concerned.
absolutely true, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
It was, but
Truth can be a violation of ethics, can't it?
And which is true for any politician. Once they're not running for office, then they have more freedom to.
I don't think that's true, John. I think truth defines ethics.
Truth could be painful, but you need to do it.
In a little over 2 minutes that we've got left, does anybody care to comment on the lack of federal government attention to human trafficking?
I'll comment
or
on
very
that.
little effort?
I'll comment on that. It's like any other effort, humanitarian effort. War on drugs. Failure to look at cause and how to deal with cause is the problem right now with human trafficking. It's only getting worse with regard, and the war on drugs is only getting worse. So there we have it. Failure to be rational and approach problem solving.
The more I read about human trafficking, the more complex it appears to be.
And this is one of the problems when we have an impeachment going on, when we have a Syrian crisis going on. Yeah. And when you go to, and it is an election cycle, and when you go to voters and say, what is your most important issue, that is not going to come up. And consequently, even though everyone claims to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, they do not. They let some of these issues, which should be dealt with, go by the wayside.
Because the public doesn't care about them enough?
It's not, there's simply not enough hours in the day to deal with everything.
The advisors are telling the candidates nobody goes into the polling place thinking
And
about
votes on human
human
trafficking, exactly.
Or climate change, for that matter. I didn't watch the debate. I had other things
It wasn't
to do
brought
in the
up.
evening, but it wasn't brought up.
I take that
apparently.
back. It was brought up by a couple of the candidates, but not as far as a question being asked about it. So,
Yeah, okay.
That's another issue that is so darn complicated, and there are so many different opinions about it that you and also it takes on the nature of a religious cause for some people. They don't care what the data is. That's just,
immigration wasn't even discussed at that
is
debate.
that right? I didn't watch.
Which is
I don't watch
amazing,
debates.
which kind of gives you
They're
an
Those sound
idea
like-
how things have changed in the last few weeks.
You talk about two things that are a waste of time: a presidential speech, and I'm talking about. I never. I would.
I agree.
As much as I loved
Platitudes.
Reagan, I would not even watch or a debate, which is not really a debate of any sort, and all. But well, that was a lovely discussion. Sorry, we missed Bryan, who had a sudden schedule change at the last minute. But Bryan, we missed you. Thank you, folks.